Okay, good morning. We're going to get going today. We're going to get through the Eisenhower era, hopefully today. Tomorrow we will take a break. You will get your midterms tomorrow. They will be all online. I will release them in the morning. So tomorrow will be a test day. Make sure you're not falling behind on that. Okay, Eisenhower. Nixon. Dwight Eisenhower, or Ike as he was called, emerged from World War II as a highly respected military leader of the greatest political appeal. Following the war set him apart from the other generals. He was from the Midwest, from Kansas. Very just this down-to-earth, very easy-going appearance for a person. You look at him, he looks like a grandpa. People respected him. Did pretty good during World War II. People fear Senator Robert A. Taft, a leading contender for the Republican nomination, will lead country back to isolationism. And Eisenhower was not wanting the country to go back to this isolationist feel because he had obviously been in the war. He saw what had happened. They thought Robert Taft would lead the party and the country back that way. But in '52, it was pretty clear the Republican was going to win this election. Now, Truman snuck out an election win in 1948, mostly because the Republicans underestimated him. And he mobilized his base, and he also appealed to a lot of moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. And so he reached across the aisle. But in '52, Truman's not running again. He is very unpopular, especially after he fired McCarthy. There was some speculation McCarthy would be the Republican nominee in '52, not to be confused with McCarthy, who they thought might be a nominee as well. Obviously, McCarthy did not get nominated, thank goodness. MacArthur did not as well. They both would have been disasters as presidents. Honestly, Truman tried to court Eisenhower. He had not declared a political affiliation up until this point. But he's going to enter as a Republican, and he's going to choose Richard Nixon as a running mate. Nixon made a strong anti-communist stance. He was from California, kind of balanced the ticket out, a little bit young, a little bit more idealistic than Eisenhower was. And he ran off the premise, "I like Ike," which is a good campaign slogan there. The '52 campaign, first election, featured TV ads, the first one to ever have ads. The "I like" slogan, one of the most memorable. We've always talked about keeping cool of Coolidge as being a good one. "I like Ike" is pretty easy to remember. Ike pledged to end the Korean War, which he did. He's the first president elected in '56 without holding a majority in Congress. During the '50s, voters at home and abroad seemed to find reassurance in selecting familiar elderly leaders to govern them, meaning young leadership was not internationally used. If you look across Germany, East or West Germany, France, the United States, Great Britain, in fact, in '51, was it 50 or '51, Churchill will be voted back. His party will be voted back in the majority into England. And the first prime minister that Queen Elizabeth II of England, the Queen of England today, had to deal with was Winston Churchill. And if you've watched The Crown, it's very interesting to see the dynamics between a young monarch who's finding her feet against a stalwart of the old generation, which was Churchill. So, that being said, Eisenhower represents that very much. Election of '52, it's pretty much, well, that's a landslide. Eisenhower wins the bulk except for the deep, deep South. Modern republicanism. Wealthy businessmen dominated Eisenhower's cabinet. He's going to scale back government spending, including the military. He was a military person, but he's going to reduce it. He was a fiscal conservative, meaning he did not like to spend money you don't have. You only use what you have. He was not a debt president. Core New Deal programs remained. He did not remove them. He kept the main ones in place. The one thing he is going to create from a tactical perspective is the interstate highway system. Not all interstate systems today are called the Eisenhower system, but the Eisenhower system is very unique because it creates the first interstates. What do you think the original point from a tactical value was of the interstates? Anyone know? You get places faster, true.
You have landing strips for planes.
Yes. the old Eisenhower systems, and let's see if I can draw it here so you can see on the video as well. The old Eisenhower systems had there had to be a mile stretch that was straight. So that's why sometimes you follow an interstate, the old interstates, like why is it going kind of like zigzag? They had to have at least a mile stretch at times that was straight. Why? She said to land a plane, right? C-130 can land on in less than a mile strip. You could land easily on a mile strip. Secondly, you can move mass amounts of troops on the interstate. Think about it from a military perspective even today. If you say interstate's closed, we're moving troop movements, you can move thousands of troops across the country within hours. Tanks, ICBMs, on the back of vehicles, troop transports, you name it. Very ingenious system. Today, modern interstates are not built to the Eisenhower standard. The Eisenhower ones are marked. They'll say like Eisenhower interstate system, and they'll see that they're straighter than the newer ones. Newer ones are not built to that degree of pedigree. That being said, it completely transforms how we travel across the country. This is also when we talked about the TV show or the movie Cars, like Radiator Springs, which time forgot. The interstate came and no one came to the town. The interstate, great for that, but it's also going to kill a lot of small communities. People aren't going to stop. Gas stations will dry up, no pun intended there. But small little places along Route 66 and stuff are going to disappear. Also, one of the first things he's going to have to deal with is Sputnik. In 1957, the Russians will launch Sputnik into orbit, drastically changing the dynamics of the Cold War. So Truman had to deal with the atomic bomb. Eisenhower is going to have to deal with the space race, the start of it. Social contract. Eisenhower is going to have to deal with a little bit of some social labor problems. AFL and CIO emerged. A new social contract, those in unions only. Unions signed long-term agreements that left decisions regarding capital investment, plant location, output, in management's hands, meaning that the unions didn't decide that. They basically got a little bit better deal by giving up some of the decision-making process. Employers stopped trying to eliminate existing unions and granted wage increases and fringe benefits. So you're not going to have a lot of strikes go on at this point. Most strikes are going to come to an end with these give-ons on both sides. Now, this is what I want to turn your attention to, and this is what your bell work is more related to this, or not bell work, your reaction quiz. If you have not looked, your reaction quiz deals with massive retaliation, or sometimes known as MAD, which is mutual assured destruction. Eisenhower approved the armistice that ended the fight in the Korean War. However, tensions remained high in the Cold War. So what is massive retaliation? Well, in 1952, a hydrogen bomb was tested by the United States. Soviet Union tested one the next year. Both sides rushed to build long-range weapons. What this means is massive retaliation. Any ally attacked, the United States would respond in full force. Meaning, you attack little West Germany, you attack some little island in the Pacific, anything that is an ally of the United States or its friends, we will defend it. And what this says, if you hit us, we're going to shoot everything back. So this is nuclear holocaust, right? That's all it is. You attacked us, we'll attack you back. And guess what? The Soviets responded with the same mentality. So MAD, or mutual assured destruction, kept countries at bay mostly. So most countries are not going to go to crazy levels of warfare. This is going to keep countries like the Soviet Union and the United States from fully deploying the full might of their military. If they had, we wouldn't probably be here today. It's the nuclear arms race, essentially, is what it is. And so your reaction quiz is looking at pros and cons to MAD, or a mutual or massive retaliation. Okay, they kind of go hand in hand. That being said, Eisenhower reduces the spending of the government on the military, but where they increase the spending is on ICBMs, nuclear bombs, aircraft, right? He goes to a smaller army, but a bigger air force, bigger nuclear arsenal. Now, there's widespread of impending war with this mentality. Bomb shelters, school drills are going to be created. Bomb shelters will be in the event of a nuclear event. Now, the reality, our school drill is going to do a lick of good. What was the purpose of the school drills?
Feel safe?
Yes, the feel safe. Exactly right, Brock. We get under our desk right here. Okay, little Johnny, we got to get ready in case of bomb. Put your head over your head. Get under your desk. Tuck your legs. Yes, we might Google it for time purposes. I want to get through the lecture, but I'll show it here maybe at the end of the hour. If you Google up the drills, they're 100% just for assurance of civil control. They're not going to be able to look good. Now, Ike and the Russians. Death of Stalin helped convince Eisenhower that Soviets, rather than being blind zealots, the Soviets were reasonable to be dealt with. After Stalin dies in '53, the Soviets are actually going to go through a period of what I call cleansing, meaning they're going to rid themselves of all the old Stalin ways. Does that mean they're a great government? No, they're still got a lot of problems, but they're not going to be defined by Stalin anymore. Nikita Khrushchev emerged as the new Soviet leader. There was a thaw that appeared after Stalin's death. However, Hungarian uprisings put an end to the thaw. Soviets brutally put it down. A group in Hungary are trying to make it basically have free elections, overthrow the communist government. The Soviets roll enough tanks and put it down aggressively, killing several thousand Hungarians. Now, Eisenhower did not aid the Hungarian rebels at all. They stayed out, going back to that mutual assured destruction or MAD concept that kept us out of Hungary. In 1958, two superpowers agreed to voluntarily halt the testing of nuclear weapons. Up until this point, both sides have been, like I said, we've watched before the Atomic Cafe, in which all those weapons were tested between 45 and like really 58, and they were devastating effects. Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane in 1960. Eisenhower denied it initially, but then the Soviets produced the pilot, Gary Powers, which became an international incident. We had been flying over them and been spying on them. So Eisenhower has to deal with this debacle of what happened. That being said, the Soviets were trying to spy on us as well. So this was a cat and mouse game that both sides were engaged in. The emergence of the Third World. Now, I think most of you know what the Third World is. It's a term invented to describe developing countries aligned with neither of the two Cold War powers and desires finding their own method of development between Soviet centralized economic planning and free market capitalism. These are places around the world where decolonization had occurred. They are very poor countries, and they're primarily located in like South America, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, places that have been colonized, Africa, but they have low income today. They haven't really stabilized. Soviet Union strongly supported the dissolution of Europe's overseas empires like the British, the French. They wanted to promote communist movements in these places. Most countries wanted to remain neutral, but they were going to be dragged into it. By the end of the 50s, much of the focus shifted to the Third World. CIA operations around the world are going to be trying to influence elections in these small countries. Suez fiasco by the British and the French. There was the Egyptians had built, or the British had built the Suez Canal. There's an attempt to take it from the Egyptians, etc. It's a mess. It's a disaster. The point of this is a lot of these countries are now going to be heavily unstable. Best example, Korea. After Korea, you're going to have a lot of disputed area around the world. But the biggest one after Korea is a little country that no American really knew until the 60s, known as Vietnam. That's where the forefront of all this is going to come to light, and you're going to see it pretty heavily displayed. So the origins of Vietnam are in this stance. We're looking at third world countries. By the way, a lot of these dictators, these bad governments, both the United States and the Soviet Union are responsible for putting them in the power, trying to outplay each other. Okay? In Vietnam, the expulsion of the Japanese in 1945 led to no independence, but to French military effort to preserve France's Asian empire against Ho Chi Minh. That's not his real name, but that's what it goes down by in history as. Ho Chi Minh had fought the Japanese and hoped that Vietnam would have its chance for independence. The French had no desire to lose their empire, and after World War II, they tried to reassert themselves in Vietnam. Eisenhower administration funded billions of dollars in aid to bolster the French efforts to basically keep and control Vietnam, but it will fail. The United States was paying for 4/5 of the cost of France, asked for military help to decline. In 1954, the Geneva Accords will divide Vietnam temporarily into North and South with elections scheduled for 56 to try to unify the country. A guy named Nigel Ding Diem with South refused to hold elections. He was a radical Catholic, and he cracked down on all Eastern religions in the country. He was a dictator. He was Catholic. He was pro-American, but he definitely was pro himself. In 1954, the French will finally pull out of a massacre. If you've ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers, at the beginning of the movie, they talk about the battle of, I can't remember the name of the battle, but the French are on patrol, and the forces under like Ho Chi Minh's leadership just brutally execute and murder this French patrol. At that point, the French are like, we've had enough, we're pulling out. Little by little, the United States got more involved as the French pulled out. After the Geneva Accords split the country into two, we will then become fully embedded with Diem in the South, trying to keep it democratic. This becomes the forefront of the fight against communism. So that's the start of Vietnam. Mass society and its critics, though, Eisenhower seemed the perfect leader for the planned society of the 50s. Consensus with the dominant ideal: we are together, we are going to do everything for the goodness of the country, we have free choice, we do a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, we are all, American, we're united, we have a good life, we want to preserve it. Even Life magazine commented that American freedom might be in greater danger from disgust than from communist subversion. Dissenting voices could be heard, but the domination of government and society had made political democracy obsolete, meaning there wasn't a lot of debate about stuff. It's like that mentality, this is what Dad says is going, and we're going to do it. There was no questioning authority, which is going to lead to the rebellious 60s. And I've alluded to this. Parents, this is the way parents operated. Dad was the head of the household. What Dad said went. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. Others worry that modern mass society will produce loneliness and anxiety. Monotony at work, meaning a lot of people went to work 9 to 5. Their jobs are kind of boring, monotonous. There was not excitement, which is going to breed a lot of disillusion going into the 60s, whether it be marital breakdowns, family breakdowns, suicide, people looking for thrills, etc. Which is also going to lead to the rise of, why do you think drugs managed to rise in the 60s and 70s? Monotonous work leads to people being bored, wanting to get a thrill. One reason people in the military like the military at times doing dangerous stuff, it gives them an adrenaline boost. Why do you think people do crazy stunts? Adrenaline boost, right? Even into your 30s, 40s, that adrenaline boost gets you going. That all being said, it's going to lead to rebels without a cause. 1955 movie Blackboard Jungle and Rebel Without a Cause highlighted the alienation of at least some young people from the world of adult respectability. Helped spur a panic about juvenile delinquency. The kids are doing nothing right. They're all being in trouble. And then Elvis Presley and the movement of his hips. I alluded to this before. This is all going to start challenging the status quo that had been established and basically the control. Though everything was going really good in the country, this is going to challenge some of the long-held notions of how things should function in the country. Okay, Freedom Movement 1. So we talked a lot about the political build-up, things going on in the 50s. We're going to do a couple of slides here, and then we'll finish up on Thursday because you got your test tomorrow. A generational rebellion will begin in the 60s. No place more evident than the black struggle for equality. Origins of this movement. Few predicted the emergence of the Southern mass movement for civil rights. With blacks' traditional allies on the left decimated by McCarthyism, most union leaders were unwilling to challenge racial inequality. That's also going to hurt the movement initially, was McCarthyism. NAACP was concentrating court battles, thus new tactics were needed. The most pressing one they'll get, it will be 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, which we'll get to later. The United States in the 1950s was still a segregated, unequal society. Half of the nation's black families lived in poverty. So, a couple statistics here. In the 50s, 22% of the country was considered in poverty, which was a pretty good level at the time. Of that 22%, you factor in the nation's African American population. Whatever the population of the African Americans was, 50% of African Americans lived in poverty. So the bulk of that 22% is going to be African American. Segregation not law in the North or the West. In the North and the West, blacks pretty much had a lot more freedom than they did anywhere else in the country. The South, they did not. In 1950, 17 southern and border states in Washington, D.C. had laws requiring the racial segregation of public schools, and several others followed districts to impose it. Northern communities, housing patterns, and school district lines created a de facto segregation. Though they did not have a legal segregation, they're going to have it by default. Okay. The illegal assaults on segregation. Eisenhower administration reluctant to address the civil rights. So this is the Freedom Movement 2. League of the United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, won an important victory in 1946 in the case of Mendez versus Westminster, ordered by schools of Orange County, California, desegregated. Governor at that time was a man named Earl Warren. Earl Warren championed this idea. By the way, he's going to become the Supreme Court Chief Justice a few years later. So California, and all their craziness today, actually was leading the way with desegregation. I would argue today that California has lost some of their compass on some of their things. Not saying they aren't progressive as not being a good thing, but I think they've got a little bit off kilter here. But at this point, it was a good move. Warren became convinced that racial equality had no place in American life. In 1953, Warren was appointed to the Supreme Court, where he became Chief Justice. Thurgood Marshall led the NAACP court campaign. So the NAACP, African Americans are going to fight in the courts. They realize if they're going to get any headway, they have to have laws changed. Lloyd Gaines, a black student in 1938, sued for admittance to MU of all places. Court granted he be admitted, but MU created a segregated law school that set aside the courts. Essentially, well, actually, I'll read the next point and it explains it. In 1950, the Supreme Court unanimously ordered Herman Sweet be admitted to UT Texas Law School, even though the state had established a school for him in a basement containing 3 classrooms and no library. So what Lloyd Gaines happened was, he got admittance, but what they did was they literally created a classroom in a closet. Or a school in a closet, right? So they appeased the court with their little manipulating of the law. However, in the second case, which is Herman Sweet against UT, they said that does not constitute as fitting that bill. Okay, does that make sense? So the way they got around it was like, think about this. Oh, we're going to let them into the Texas Law School, but you're going to have your own classroom and, like you're going to be in the basement and all this. That crap is going to end in the 50s. Earl Warren, who comes along here, and other justices are going to say, hey, listen, that's not right. And so this is leading up to the most important case dealing with segregation, which we'll get to on Thursday, which is the Brown case. The Brown versus Board of Education. So, as a recap today, we talked about mutual assured destruction, MAD, and massive retaliation. We talked about the origins of the Cold War, political subversion around the world, a little bit our involvement. And then we've touched a little bit on the civil rights movement and the growing conflicts with it and the challenges of trying to change society. That concludes that portion for today. We'll get into the Brown case on Thursday and finish up. We'll be able to finish all our lecture notes on Thursday. Tomorrow you'll have your midterm test that will be online. I will post it tomorrow. Good job. Make sure you're getting everything done. Chapter 23 action quizzes I'll start grading probably today. Chapter 24 reaction quiz is up. Chapter 24 quiz will be posted Friday. We are moving along at a pretty brisk pace. I will try to keep grades updated as I can. Have a great day.